Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News with one of the two men hoping to be the next Prime Minister. Over the next hour, we'll put your questions to Jeremy Hunt in the battle for number 10. Very good evening. Welcome to Sky News Centre for this special programme, an uninterrupted hour with the Foreign Secretary and Conservative leadership candidate Jeremy Hunt. Welcome indeed, Mr.
Good evening,
Hunt.
Kay. Good evening, viewers.
Over the course of the course of the next hour, we're going to be asking questions submitted to Sky News by Conservative voters and examining the issues that they throw up. Lots of tricky questions to come about your plans as Prime Minister, but first, something relevant to your current job and dramatic scenes, as you've seen in Hong Kong tonight, where police have been clashing, as you can see, with pro-democracy protesters. I know that you have tweeted about that earlier on today, Foreign Secretary. What is your message to the authorities there?
Well, my starting point is that I have never had to fight for my freedom in my life. And my dad was in the Navy, and he and his generation were really responsible for winning the Cold War, and they knew what it was like to be on the front line against freedom. And he taught me we can never take our freedoms for granted. So when I look at those situations that we've just seen in those terrible scenes in Hong Kong, my heart goes out to people who do have to fight for their freedoms and who are worried they could lose very, very precious way of life.
Even if they use violence?
Well, I don't support violence in any circumstances, but I understand their worries about changes that are happening in Hong Kong. And when I talked to the Chinese government about this, you know, they put out a statement last week saying this is an internal affair and it's not for Britain to meddle in it. But we signed an agreement with China in 1984. It was actually Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping who signed the joint declaration, which guaranteed what's called the one country, two systems promise for 50 years for Hong Kong, and that has been the foundation of Hong Kong's success. So I really hope that there aren't changes in Hong Kong that undermine that agreement, which is a legally binding agreement between Britain and China. And as I said today, we stand behind what was in that agreement. We stand behind the freedoms that it enshrined, and we stand behind the people of Hong Kong.
Doesn't necessarily look as though China is doing the same thing as the UK would want them to. Carrie Lam, the chief executive who represents China, that is what a lot of these protests are about. They want her to be gone. What would you say to President Xi of China if you could speak to him?
Well, what I would say
I'm sure you do speak to him all the time.
Well, I've met him, but what I would say to President Xi is look at how special Hong Kong is. This city of just 7 million people, a fraction the size of China, and yet one of the world's great centres of enterprise. And it's because of that special mix in its history of British and Chinese influence. And let it be. It says so much for China if it's prepared to allow Hong Kong to operate under a different system with those basic democratic freedoms. And, you know, I think that should stay.
OK. We've got lots of questions for you, as you can imagine, over the next hour. Let's stay with foreign policy, which is where we started from. These are questions from our audience, and this is from James, who is in Marlow. And he says Iran is increasing enriched uranium in its bid to gain nuclear weapons. Will the UK now reconsider its support for the Iran deal, which has given the Islamic Republic billions to fund terrorism and war across the Middle East?
Well, James, you are absolutely right to highlight this issue because it is one of the biggest worries on my mind at the moment. If you look around the world, if you say, which is the part of the world where we could have an unexpected war, a conflict which draws big powers in and becomes much, much more significant than might at first seem, it is here. And we have this Iran nuclear deal, which Britain and actually at that time the United States under President Obama signed up to, because we knew that Iran was just 18 months away from getting a nuclear weapon. And I think that was the right thing to do, because I think today, if Iran had a nuclear weapon, things would be even more dangerous. But a deal is a deal. And we have said that we will carry on trading with Iran.
So we're on the side of Iran rather than the US on this?
We have said that we support this nuclear deal. We're on the side of the US as it was 4 years ago under President Obama, but President Trump has taken a different view. We want to preserve that deal because we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Okay. But if Iran breaks that deal, then we're out of it as well.
OK, so what if President Trump, you're Prime Minister next month, and President Trump picks up the phone and says, you know what, I'm not happy with what's going on with Iran and we are going to launch some sort of attack? What would you say?
Well, I can't envisage any circumstances where we would be part of that because we have taken a different view on this nuclear deal and the sanctions
so he's on his own on this one.
That America have decided to impose. However, what President Trump is saying, in this I totally agree with him. The root cause of instability in the Middle East are the terrorist organisations that Iran is sponsoring in different countries. You know, we have the Hezbollah attacks on Israel. We also have the Houthis who are launching missiles into Saudi Arabia. And what the President is saying is that we aren't going to get peace in the Middle East unless Iran recognises that this kind of destabilising activity has to stop.
Are we on the side of Iran or Saudi?
Well, we believe that in terms of regional stability, the Saudis do want to preserve peace, and we are very worried that what Iran does is destabilising. That doesn't mean we agree with Saudi on everything they do, but in terms of regional peace, we do think that they are trying to keep the peace in the Middle East.
Like cutting up journalists into little bits.
Well, we don't agree with that, of course, and we've been very, very clear with Saudi. Sometimes there are people that you have a strategic partnership with, and you have to have very difficult conversations. And I've had those conversations.
Yeah, but when we got together in September, I think it was, in New York, and you'd just become Foreign Secretary, you said you had very distinct red lines. Surely chopping a journalist into little bits, Jamal Khashoggi, crosses that red line?
It does. And I had
what have we done about it?
Well, I had a very difficult meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia when I went there. And I've had a number of discussions with the Saudi Foreign Minister about it. And I've made very clear in public and in private, that kind of thing is totally against our values. Yeah. And I've done something else, actually, Kay. I've organised the world's first ever ministerial conference on media freedom, which is happening next week in London, to make sure that we as a country are flying the flag for the kind of freedoms that you see people in Hong Kong protesting for, that we have always supported as a country. Because, you know, we have our allies, we have our partners,
but they're more than strategic
but we also
allies,
have our... Well, they are our strategic allies,
They're
yes.
our closest allies in the region?
Well, I think our...
We do a lot of business with them?
Yes, we do, but
Which is why we've not taken it too far over Khashoggi?
No, we have very good relations with other countries in the region as well. Look, our closest ally in the world is the United States. And why is that? Because, you know, I think the big battle that we are going to have to fight in this century is between open and closed societies.
Okay.
And whatever you think of an individual president, in the end, this country, and under me as Prime Minister, this country will always stand up for our democratic values. Yeah. And so that is why, just to make this point, that is why I've made the commitment, and I'm the only candidate in this campaign to have made a commitment, that we will increase our defence spending to beyond 2% of GDP. Because I want the world to know at the point of Brexit, when we've got these really big new chapter opening in our country's history, that Britain is one of the few countries in the world that has stood up for democratic values and the security that you need to underpin them.
Okay, so
Britain is here and our voice is loud.
So how do you feel about our closest ally, as you've described them, in the form of President Trump as it stands, cozying up to somebody like President Putin, who poisons people on British soil and also jokes together at the G20 in Osaka about getting rid of journalists?
Well,
because we know that what that means in Russia, don't we?
Let me say as a starting point that I don't agree with everything President Trump says or everything President Trump does. But I met him a number of times, and he is the kind of person who has no problem if you disagree with him, as long as you're straight, direct. And I talk to him businessman to businessman. We don't agree on the Iran nuclear deal. We don't agree on climate change. I certainly wouldn't agree with his comments on journalists. But I do agree with him when he says and he said at the time of the D-Day memorial celebrations that the alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States is the greatest in history. And if you look at the world that we've had for the last 75 years, this has been a world where there has been more prosperity, more freedom, more peace than humanity has ever had. And the relationship, the alliance, the friendship, the shared values between the United Kingdom and the United States is at the heart of that. And as Prime Minister, I will stop at nothing to protect that.
OK, you're on safe territory with foreign affairs. Let's be honest, it's your brief. Let's move on to Brexit.
Things can go wrong in foreign affairs as well. But,
well, yeah, but you know, you're certainly up to speed on that. Where are you on Brexit? The question from Justin Butcher from Manchester. Justin says, you are prepared to leave the EU without a deal at the end of October. 2/3 of Conservative members agree, but only a quarter of the country does. Won't the promises that you are making in this race cost you a general election?
Well, Justin is absolutely right to ask that question, because we're at a very pivotal moment in the Brexit negotiations, and we don't have a majority in Parliament. And if we get this wrong, we could end up with an accidental general election that lets in Jeremy Corbyn, and we would end up with no Brexit at all, because the one thing the Labour Party would not allow him to do is to deliver Brexit. Now, I very strongly believe, sorry to go back to foreign affairs, but when I go around the world, I notice that people have a whole lot more respect for Britain than we sometimes seem to have for ourselves. And one of the reasons for that is because we are one of the oldest and most respected democracies in the world. And this is a country where people like me do what the people tell us. So I think it is imperative that we deliver on the referendum result. But we're going to need to...
With or without a deal, as you've told us today.
With or without a deal.
Tell us about your 10-point plan in not quite as much detail as you told us earlier, but do go on. I mean, it seems pretty scary to me.
Well, I think that we have to recognise that no deal will be very scary to a lot of people, including the person I met last week running a factory that makes steel wheels in Kidderminster. He said that his business could be wiped out by a no-deal Brexit, including the farmer I met in Shropshire a few months earlier, who exports 95% of his lamb to the EU. And that's why today I announced that, as Prime Minister, there will be a £20 billion support package for business, for farmers, for the fishing community, to make sure that if we do end up in a no-deal situation, we can weather that storm. But it's not my first choice. And I'd say that if you look at what both Boris and I are saying, on no deal, it's actually pretty similar. We're both saying that we don't want it, but if it's the only way to deliver Brexit, we'd do it. The difference is who is the person who is most likely to get a deal before we get to that point, so we don't have to make that very, very difficult decision.
The difference is that you're selling a nightmare from what you were saying today. Boris is selling a dream. Billions of pounds in tariffs for business is a likelihood. Chaos on the Irish border, confusion at the ports, emergency powers you talked about today. What on earth is that all about? And a loss of business, which you talked about with one of my colleagues yesterday, is a price worth paying. Boris, he's not here, so we can't ask him, but his seems to be a dream. We come out of the European Union and all will be well. If we come out of the European Union without a deal, with your plan, what does that mean?
Well, first of all, on the point you've just raised, Kay, what a shame that Boris isn't here, because this is an audition for the most important job in the country. And I would love to debate these issues with Boris head to head. You're going to be subjected to more scrutiny in that job than either of us have ever had in our life. But let me answer. Yeah, let's answer your question. As Prime Minister, I will always be straight with people, and no deal will be disruptive to businesses up and down the country, disruptive to the farming industry, to the fishing community. And I am someone who comes from a business background, and I know what it's like when a business is under pressure because of a sudden change in the market that you can't control. And businesses are the lifeblood of our country. And I am, I'll be the first Prime Minister who's been an entrepreneur. So what I say is, yes, I am pro-business, but I'm also pro-democracy. And we are going to implement this referendum result. We're going to leave the European Union. And so I say to businesses, I will be there for you That's what I was announcing today. With my plan, we will put in place measures that make it possible for you to withstand these challenges, and that's what I do.
Your figures don't add up, though, according to none other than our present Chancellor. This is what he tweeted earlier on today. The fiscal firepower we have built up in case of a no-deal Brexit will only be available for extra spending if we leave with an orderly transition. You're not necessarily suggesting that. If not, it will all be needed to plug the hole a no-deal Brexit will make in the public finances. You don't have the war chest.
Well, actually, I agree with what Philip Hammond is saying there, that what he calls the fiscal firepower there is what you would need for a no-deal Brexit. And yes, we would not be able to do some of the other things. We talked about defence spending earlier. That's something I think is very important if Britain's going to walk tall in the world. Those kind of spending plans would be delayed if we have a no-deal Brexit, because we would need to be helping out businesses to help them smooth that transition.
So,
that's why I want to go for a deal.
Where would the money come from for that, then?
Sorry?
Where would the money come from? There's no money in the war chest. This war chest is here if we have an orderly Brexit.
Yes, and so we're going to have to use that headroom in order to cushion the impact of a no-deal Brexit. And that's why, money for the social care system, for the education system, all those things that I'd very much like to spend, will have to wait. But that's why the crucial thing is to send to Brussels a Prime Minister who has a better chance of getting a deal, someone that they'll talk to, negotiate with, and I don't say it's going to be easy, but it's not impossible either. And I have sat through the night negotiating big deals, stayed around the table till 3 in the morning, come in before breakfast to try and get something resolved. So I know what it takes to negotiate a deal. This will be a difficult one, but it is possible to do, because when you talk to European leaders, they want to solve this problem as well. And if we offer them a sensible solution, I know they'll listen.
Your new deal, or no deal, depends on what happens between 23rd, 24th of July and the end of September. You've brought a new deadline to the end of September. If we're not in a position where it looks as though we're going to get a deal by the 31st of October, you said this morning we will stop negotiating with the European Union. You spent 3 years, best part of 3 years, trying to do a deal as part of Mrs May's government. What makes you think you can do it in 6 weeks, 8 weeks?
Well, it's challenging, but it will be a different approach to the approach Theresa May took. Now, I don't want to sit here with UK and air every single disagreement I had with Theresa May, because I think she has a tremendous sense of duty as our Prime Minister. I think she put herself heart and soul into this. The reality is, though, that approach didn't work. And what I would do that's different to that is, first of all, I'd be going for a different deal. Her deal
had... different?
Well, her deal had this thing called the backstop for Northern Ireland, which would have meant that we had to follow the EU's customs tariffs effectively until the EU gave us permission not to do that. That was never something I believed in. I argued against it, and I didn't think it would get through Parliament. But the negotiating reason why I think that approach came unstuck was that, in the end, the EU didn't want to offer us any more concessions because they didn't believe that she was going to be able to get it through Parliament. And my approach will be quite different. I will have in my negotiating team the DUP, who are the Irish party that we have an alliance with, Northern Irish party that we have an alliance with in Parliament.
Mostly?
Yes, most of the time. The ERG, who are the Brexit purists inside the Conservative Party, and also Scottish and Welsh Conservatives, so that when we make an offer...
Which of those do you think might make a difference to our European colleagues?
Well, what our European friends want to know is that when we make an offer, we can actually get it through Parliament. So if you've got people from all these groups inputting, they know we'll be serious. And so what I said today is this is not going to be something that takes a huge amount of time. We will put together that package in August. We will then...
over the previous 6 weeks?
Yeah, but I think that...
Is that from scratch?
No, because I think a lot of what we have in the current agreement people can live with. The main issue of contention is the backstop, so we will
So it's 6 weeks renegotiating the backstop?
No, it's 6 weeks coming together with an alternative plan. And by the way, Conservative MPs like Greg Hands and Nicky Morgan have been doing some brilliant work, even this week, in coming up with an alternative approach using technology. So we'll do that. Then in September, we'll take it to the EU. And I'm not saying that we will conclude a deal in September, but I think 3 weeks is plenty long enough for me as Prime Minister to make a judgment as to whether there is a prospect of a deal that can get through Parliament.
So what would have to be the situation on the 30th of September for you to think, you know what, I potentially could extend past the 31st of October?
Well, I'm not looking to make any kind of extension. As far as I'm concerned, a day beyond the 29th of March, when we were supposed to have left, is a day too long.
With respect, that wasn't my question.
No, but my answer to you would be that I don't think it'll just be me that knows this. I think the whole country will know if there is a prospect, having put a deal to the European Union that we know can get through Parliament, if they're interested. I mean, they'll probably get back to us in a matter of days. And then if there is that prospect of a deal, then of course I'm going to think about the farmers and the fishing community and the small business people and the people on high street shops, and I will try and get that deal through.
So Halloween's not a do or die for you then?
Well, I think the only difference between me and Boris is that I've said that if we have a deal and it just needs a few extra days in order to get through Parliament, then I'm going to be thinking of those business people up and down the country who want
next
a
deadline
deal.
Be?
Well, Boris has said that even if we have a deal and it hasn't got through Parliament, then that's it, all over, game over. Would it be the end of the
year? Would it be the end of our present tenure in 2020? When would it be?
Well, I said I would be prepared to accept a few extra days to allow parliamentary passage of a deal that we have agreed will work. But
so just a few days?
I'm not talking about anything significantly long, of course not, because I think we're going to know pretty quickly if the EU are prepared to talk about this or not.
But this is all pie in the sky, really, isn't it? Because our European colleagues or friends, as you've described us, this is what they have been saying, as you well know. But just to remind our viewers, Michel Barnier saying this treaty is the only one possible. In other words, we are not going to renegotiate. And there is Mo, Jean-Claude Juncker. There will be no renegotiation of the withdrawal agreement. And if that wasn't enough, your friend and colleague Angela Merkel, the exit agreement will not be changed.
Well, this is a group of people who spent 2 years coming to an agreement with Theresa May, and this is a negotiation, so of course they're going to take a position like that at the outset. But when you talk to those people, and I've talked to some of them, they also say that if a new Prime Minister comes forward with new proposals that are sensible, of course they will look at the package. And I think that's what would happen, and I don't...
Has any of them actually said that to you?
Yes.
You meet them all the time, don't you? Which one?
I had a conversation with Angela Merkel.
What did she say?
Well, exactly what I've just said to you. Of course, we will look at any proposals made by a new UK Prime Minister because she wants to solve this problem. And, you know, providing we're sensible, I think the approach that I've laid out is a sensible approach and a fair approach. And I think that it's in Germany's interests as well, not just because of the risks to German industry, but someone like Angela Merkel is very conscious of the global importance of a strong partnership between the UK and Germany. And so, of course, they are looking at this saying, where's the win-win, where's the solution that can work? So
Angela Merkel has taken you to one side and said, I know what I'm saying in public, Jeremy, but actually, with the new Prime Minister, there is some wriggle room, we could renegotiate a little bit with the withdrawal agreement.
What she said is she will look at the package. And I think she would look at it with an open mind. I'm not going to say to you here that this is going to be easy, and that's why what is important is that we choose a negotiator, someone who genuinely has a prospect of changing minds, someone who has experience of these kinds of negotiations, and someone, you know, they're willing to talk to, because the first rule of negotiation is you don't do a deal with someone you don't trust. And so we need to send someone that we can have those negotiations.
Are you suggesting they wouldn't trust Boris Johnson?
I'm not going to say anything about anyone else. I'm just saying that, look at me. I believe that my credentials are someone who could possibly pull this thing off. But I would never pretend to anyone that it's going to be easy.
And do you think that Angela Merkel, when she says that, is representing, she's a senior statesperson, of course, representing Germany or representing other members of the European Union?
I think she is representing what a lot of people think in the EU, which is that this is a very difficult problem. They too would like to resolve it. They don't, I think, want to trap Britain in the EU against its will, and people like me make it absolutely clear that we are leaving. But Part of the thing that will persuade them is what I did today, which is to announce very credible plans as to how we would manage a no-deal Brexit, so that they know that we're not afraid of leaving without a deal. It's not our choice, just like it wouldn't be their choice, but that we are ready. And that's why I think it's very important that the very first thing that our Prime Minister needs to do on going through the door of number 10 is to press go on all the no-deal preparations.
How would you get a no deal if this didn't come off? How would you get a no deal through the British Parliament, given that they've already voted against it?
Well, I think this is why, in the end, this debate about the 31st of October is a bit of a fake debate, because whoever's Prime Minister, whether it's me or whether it's Boris, is going to have to deal with the fact that Parliament may well try to stop a no-deal Brexit.
And he may well, in return, prorogue Parliament. Would you do the same?
I wouldn't. I think it
Definitely not 100% guaranteed.
100% not. You know, we voted to leave the EU because we wanted to restore parliamentary democracy. You cannot, in that situation, force through a no-deal Brexit by closing down Parliament. The British people would not accept that, including, I think, many people who voted for Brexit. The way you avoid all those difficult choices that could face me and they could face Boris is to have a Prime Minister who has a realistic prospect of negotiating a deal that can get through Parliament, and that's what I'm offering.
OK, Richard Piper is 65 years old and he is from Tonbridge, and this is what he has to say. It's still about Brexit. You may need more water. How are you going to persuade countries with big economies to give us a better trade deal than we currently enjoy with the EU, when our negotiating strength will be diminished?
Well, I think the answer to that question, Richard, is that you know, someone who set up their own business, I want to turbocharge our economy. I think our big opportunity now, we've got the top universities in Europe, 3 of the top 10 universities in the world. We have more technology entrepreneurs, more medicines being developed here, and we could be the world's next Silicon Valley. And that is my ambition for our country, to set us up for what's called the 4th Industrial Revolution. Now, if all the technology, all the really exciting new things that are happening when it comes to those technological developments are happening here in Britain, then the other side are going to want to do a trade deal with us every bit as much as we want to do a trade deal with them.
Okay.
So it's about creating that balance of advantage that makes the UK a country that you have to do business with.
If the other side is the European Union and we haven't paid our divorce bill because we have come out without a deal, they're not going to be interested.
Well, you know,
That would be the first time, by the way, since the Napoleonic Wars that we've defaulted on a debt. Do you want to be that Prime Minister?
No. I think we are a country that pays our legal debts as a businessman.
So we will pay the divorce bill?
As a businessman, I pay my bills, and I think the kind of country we are is a country that pays our bills. But some of that 39...
There's a but coming.
There is a but coming, because, you know, I'm absolutely clear that of the 39 billion, what is legally owing, we will pay. But some of that money is for the transition period. Well, you know, there's a discussion to be had. Some of that money...
You did the deal, didn't you? You were part of a government that did the deal, so you know what the figures are.
Well, I think that a big chunk of that money, depending on who you talk to, up to...
I'm talking to you.
Yes, I know you're talking to me. I'm just telling you that there is some debate about this, but, you know, several billion pounds of that...
What would you be comfortable with as Prime Minister?
Well, I'm telling you what I would not be comfortable with, and that is not paying the money that we legally owe. And let me tell you why that is. Because if we... no, I want to just make this...
Yes, please, but I don't know how much we legally owe, and well, you obviously do know, so if you want to share it with our viewers...
I'm saying that there's several billions of that is to do with the transition period that we wouldn't need. But my point is this. If we're going to make a success of Brexit, we need to have a friendly relationship with our next-door neighbours. Unlike a divorce, where you might move to the other side of town or even somewhere completely different when you separate as a couple, we are going to remain next door. And it is in all of our interests that we have a friendly relationship. And you would poison that relationship for decades to come if we don't pay the money that is legally due. However, it will take longer to get that money, and it won't be as much as 39 billion if we don't do a deal. So I think that's a big incentive for the EU to make sure that we do a deal.
However, We took part in a withdrawal agreement. You were very well aware of the details of that withdrawal agreement. I'm sure that you talked about it in Cabinet an awful lot of the time. The European Union is expecting £39 billion as part of that divorce agreement. Are we going to adopt that sort of British holiday maker tactic of speaking slower and louder and hoping that they understand what we're trying to say?
Well, that is not what would happen with me as Prime Minister, because if you're negotiating a deal, you have to have trust between both sides. They have to think that you're being reasonable. They have to want to do a deal with you. And if you start saying, we're not going to pay you the money that's legally yours, they just won't talk to you. And so that's why I would not go down that route. And I think if you go down that route, you are closing off the best solution for the United Kingdom, which is actually to negotiate a deal that works for both sides. Not easy to do, but as I say, not impossible. And I think the best thing for businesses up and down the country, the best thing for our union, by the way, you know, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, to get that deal.
I've got a question about the union coming up, so we'll come back to that if I might just pause you there. But you're not going to give me a figure on how much...
No, I think, you know, we have to look into that £39 billion very carefully.
Half of it?
I'm not going to give you a figure.
Quarter?
Sorry, Kelly, you're very persuasive, but just not on this occasion.
Obviously not on this one. We're talking about trust. You talked earlier on today about £6 billion that you would be making available to mitigate the problems with tariffs that fishermen and farmers would have here in the United Kingdom. So it would be a sort of transitional amount of cash that was made available to them if there was no deal until we could do a deal with the European Union or whoever else it might be. We spoke to the WTO earlier on today, and they said that basically you can't subsidise exports, and they are cutting down on all subsidies, including farming and fisheries.
Yes, those are the WTO rules. And let me be clear, the money I'm announcing today is not a subsidy for tariffs, because that would be against WTO rules. This is an amount of money to help those businesses transition from one business model to another. If you export 95% of your lamb to Europe and suddenly you've got a 40% tariff on that, then the European market is going to be very difficult for you. So you're going to have to change your business. Maybe you'll export more lamb domestically. Maybe you'll change the products that you sell in order to deal with those changed circumstances. So what I want to do is to give them support over a period of years to change their businesses so they can adapt to a very different situation.
What about other industries? Is it just fishermen and farmers, or...?
No, I think we will need to help other industries as well. Yeah, well, you know, look at the automotive industry.
850,000 people are...
Yes.
Directly or indirectly employed in the car industry. 10% tariffs on vehicles. A lot of jobs are going to go.
That is why, you know, you can never be complacent about the effect of no deal. I mean,
But would you be offering them support as well or not?
The car industry is a very good example, actually. I remember in the 1970s, actually, I can remember in the 1980s, all the problems we had with British Leyland. Now you look at our car industry employing nearly 1 million people and globally incredibly competitive. And, you know, for them, it would be a very serious issue to deal with no deal. And so, yes, they would need support to transition as well. But that is why, you know, choose a Prime Minister who has a chance of getting us a deal.
OK, but would you offer tariffs to the car industry? Help with tariffs for the car industry?
I'm not offering help with tariffs for anyone. I'm offering help to transition.
Would you offer a similar sort of deal that you're offering to farmers and fishermen to the car industry?
I would offer support, yes,
OK,
because they need to transition their business models.
We need to move on. I know we've got an hour, but it's already racing by. Jack McCabe from London. When you become the UK Prime Minister, how will you ensure that the UK remains a country of 4 nations? In other words, how do you fix the vexation of the backstop? Well,
I'm glad Jack answered that question. Let me tell you where I'm coming from. I've got Welsh blood, Irish blood. I spent 2 happy years of my childhood in Scotland, and I am a unionist to my core. And as Prime Minister, I will never allow the breakup of the United Kingdom. And that's why I think it's very important as we negotiate this Brexit deal that we do something that works for all 4 parts of the UK, because that is what is brilliant about our...
Is the union or Brexit more important?
Well, the union has to be the starting point, but Brexit matters too, because one of the great things about our union is that we symbolise democracy across the world, and therefore we have to implement Brexit. We have to do it in a way that works for the union. Now, the backstop, is obviously the main reason why Brexit has not gone through the House of Commons.
Exactly.
And that's why we need to find a different solution.
And what's your solution?
My solution is based on technology. It's what the Germans describe as invisible borders. I think that most borders across the world in the next decade will go in that direction. And I think there is technology there now that means that...
Is there?
Well, I believe there is.
Not according to the Home Office.
Well, no, the Home Office actually, well, the Home Secretary believes there is.
Okay.
And I believe there is as well, because you can do checks away from borders. But let's be clear, the people who don't accept...
That's two separect issues, though, isn't it, with respect
You go on,
to
Kate,
Foreign
you tell me.
Secretary? I was just going to say a possible solution. We had a leaked document from the Home Office saying possible solution, incredibly complicated, very expensive, and it wouldn't be deliverable until 2030. So if you then say, well, we'll take that away from the border, does that mean that we have a border in the Irish Sea? And if we do, what does that mean for your colleagues from the DUP that you're going to take to negotiate? Because they're not going to want that, are they?
Well, you've taken one leaked document, if I may say that, you know, my impression, having read many government documents on this, is that it is...
So this is wrong?
I think overall it is technically possible. And it's a question of creating a negotiating environment where it is also politically acceptable to the EU and to the government in the Republic of Ireland. And you know, that is what I think, if we send the right Prime Minister, we have a chance.
Before 2030?
Well, hang on, this is one selective quote.
No, but you were saying it was technologically... I'm just asking
I believe
you
it's
when.
technically possible now.
Now,
I do.
And you don't feel that we need to have a border on the Irish ports and thus, by default, a border within the Irish Sea?
Well, I think you can do these things by having checks that are done at the source, at the factory, one end or the other. You can do it by use of technology, so people register in advance on the internet. You have trusted trader schemes. There are all sorts of ways of doing it. I don't think it's a question of what's technically possible. It's a question of politically negotiating to make that part of the deal.
OK, well, Andy Tindham wants to talk to you about trust, if we may. He's in Ascot. He's 51 years old. And this is what Andy has to say. Do you recognise the role you and your colleagues have played in the loss of public faith in politicians? And what do you personally intend to do to restore public trust?
Well, there is only one way right now to restore trust, and that is to deliver what we as parliamentarians promised at the last election, that we were going to leave the European Union. And particularly for the people who voted for Brexit, that is the single issue of trust that we're failing on. Now, I'm someone who voted 3 times for a deal that would have meant that we've left the European Union by now. But I think all MPs on both sides of the debate need to understand that issue of trust. And what I would say to Andy is, that is one thing we need to do. But then the other thing we need to do is to bring the country together.
How do we do that?
Well, I'll tell you how we do that, Kay. We have to do what we promised for the 52%, and they want us to leave the European Union, leave the single market, leave the customs union, because that's what people voted for at the last election. You said you would do that on the 31st of March, and it didn't happen. We did, and that is why...
And now you're saying there's wriggle room on the 31st of October.
Well, no, I'm just being honest with people that Parliament, a hung Parliament, is not a Parliament that the Conservative Party controls, could seek to block that 31st of October Brexit. But let me tell you how we unite the country, because that's the other thing. You also then have to have a Brexit that works for the 48%. And the people who voted for Remain, who are worried. And I talk to a lot of people who voted for Brexit, but also to people who voted Remain. And what they are worried about is that Brexit could change the fundamental character of our country as an open, outward-looking, internationally minded country. And that is not going to happen, not with a Conservative Brexit. The Brexiteers I know, they don't want that kind of Brexit. They want us to continue to be open to the world. It's one of the great things about our country. And so we have to show, and I think if we can deliver that type of Brexit, in 10 years' time, Remainers, or people who voted Remain, will see that actually Brexit has worked, it's been a great success, and it hasn't changed the fundamental tolerance of our country. And I think that is how we bring the country together.
Big if, though, isn't it?
Well, delivering Brexit is, of course, going to be bumpy. But I just say this, we've got to have some confidence. I mean, we have faced much, much bigger challenges than this in our history before. And, you know, I look at this as a bit like I thought when I was starting a business. This is one of those moments where a new chapter is opening. The sky's the limit. We can make this work.
How very appropriate. Boris famously made promises on the side of a bus. What would you pledge, writ large, on the side of a bus?
Well, let me say this. Boris promised on the side of a bus an extra 350 million every week for the NHS. I actually delivered that promise.
You did.
And Boris promised Brexit,
a bit more,
and I will deliver
yeah.
Brexit.
OK, what would you have
and what would I
on the
promise
side of the bus?
on the side of the bus?
Yeah.
Should we talk non-Brexit for a moment?
Yes, please.
Because, OK, well, 4 things. First of all, I want...
It's a very big bus.
I'm going to say them very
small, right?
OK, 4. Let's we have 4 buses?
Yeah.
OK, number 1, Britain that walks tall in the world. And that's why I've said I'll spend more money on defence, why I will cherish our special relationship with the United States. But more importantly, when you see those scenes in Hong Kong, a country that stands up for democratic values. That's number 1. On the second bus, I think we Conservatives have to have a social mission as well as an economic mission. I was Health Secretary for nearly 6 years, but actually I want our social mission to be in education. I'm teaching my 5-year-old daughter to read at the moment, and reading about Biff and Boff and Kipper is quite nice relaxation at the end of the day. But you realise that getting a child to read is a big deal. And nearly a quarter of primary school leavers don't learn to read or write properly. And this is a terrible thing to leave people when they go out into the world. So
I'm only allowing you 2 buses.
Can I do the third and the fourth very super quickly?
Yes, you can, although Boris has only made 2, but go on very quickly.
Third one, turbocharge the economy. We've talked about Silicon Valley.
And fourth?
And the fourth one is actually a promise for the Conservative Party. And that is that by the time we fight the next election, I'm going to get more young people to vote Conservative, because we can't be the party of aspiration unless the most aspirational people in the country are supporting us.
That brings us beautifully to our next question. And this is Grace Asprey, and she is 19 years old, and she's from Wigan in Lancashire. She says, as party leader, what would you do to try to engage young people in politics and to support the Conservative Party?
Well, great question. And this is what I would say to Grace. We have no future as a Conservative Party unless we get people like you voting for us. And that means understanding your aspirations. Now, when I was 19 years old, when I was Grace's age, that was actually the year that I joined the Conservative Party. And my dreams then were to set up my own business, buy a house and save up for a family. That was actually Conservative Party policy back in the 1980s. And so we have to recognise that for young people now, buying a house is much, much harder than it was when you or I were that age. And so we've got to do something about that. We have to recognise some unfairnesses for young people. However much I talk to mums and dads on the doorstep, I cannot justify 6% interest rates on student loans. I think it's unfair. I support our tuition fee reforms, but that needs to change. So we have to tap into their aspirations. But the other thing we have to do is to show them that we share their values.
Yeah.
On things like climate change, you know, they look at us and they say, we're going to be around in 50 years' time, you oldies may not be. Are you really going to look after the planet? And we are the Conservative Party. We believe in conservation. We want to protect the green belt.
What do you do at home to try, I mean, what are your plans as far as trying to save the planet are concerned? We know what the government's plans are, 2050, carbon neutral, etc., etc. What do you do at home?
Well, I think like every family,
Do you eat less meat than you would?
I probably do eat a little bit less red meat, but more for health reasons. But, you know, we've moved to metal straws rather than plastic straws. Just a small example. Obviously, we're much more conscientious about recycling.
Foreign Secretary, you travel all over the globe, though. What's your carbon footprint there?
Well, you know, I think it is important to travel and represent our country, and you know, that is one of the things that goes with the territory. But I think that as a country, you know, we will be the first in the world to sign up to a legally binding net zero 2050 target. That's a big transition. We're already on that journey. But what 19-year-olds say to us is, look, we know we've done something, but have we done enough? And the answer is not yet.
OK. How do you convince people like Grace, though, or a younger me? Because, you know, you are, if I might say, a quintessential home counties posh boy, aren't you? I mean, your father was an admiral. When you were 19, you just finished being head boy at Charterhouse. I'm from the same place as Grace. When I was 19, lived in a council house in Wigan, and I worked on the meat counter at Asda to try and earn some extra money. How do you talk to a younger me or to Grace to convince me that I want to vote Conservative?
Well, first of all, let me say this. You know, I went to a posh school. I had a fantastic education, and I was very lucky. And I also felt deeply uncomfortable that because I was lucky enough to go to that school, I might have better life chances than someone with equal talents, equal ambition, equal energy, who didn't have the chance to go to get such a great education. I am incredibly proud of the education reforms that have been championed by Michael Gove under this Conservative government, that have improved the quality of state schools so that a number of them are as good as Charterhouse, the school I went to. And I think that's a fantastic reform. But I still think we have a national blind spot. And that's why I said I want education to be our social mission. And I want to tell you what it is, okay? We've thought a lot about the half of school leavers who go to university. On the whole, get a pretty good education. But what about the school leavers who don't? If this was Germany or Switzerland, nearly all of them would leave with a rigorous qualification that meant that they could earn the average salary. And I think we should be the Conservative government that promises that every single young person will leave education with a rigorous qualification, because we are the party that wants to put a ladder in front of everyone as they start out on their life. Whether they choose to climb that ladder or not, that's up to them. But we should be the party that makes sure that everyone has that ladder. OK,
so Boris, I think it's fair to say, connects with younger voters. He's always up for a laugh. Tell us a joke.
I was dreading you asking something like that. Well, I think in this campaign, the best jokes I've seen have probably been on the internet.
Anything to do with your name?
You know, for the first time in my life, actually, the internet's been quite kind to me. I think it's because they think I'm the underdog, and they actually ran a campaign to tell Jeremy what his slogan should be for this leadership campaign. So we had hashtag take a punt on Hunt.
I'm not going to try and say that.
Hashtag Jezza's the Bezza. And then the one that you're really not going to try and say is hashtag Hunty McHuntface. So be very careful on that one.
Yeah. The thing that always makes me laugh is BBC hospitality, but that's another story. Let's move on to Oliver Dooley from Birmingham. He says, given your record in the Department of Health, how would you act differently when managing the country?
Well, let me tell Oliver the thing that really changed me when I was Health Secretary. And that was the first real crisis I had to deal with was mid-staffs. And the department, or some people in the department, cautioned me not to meet the mid-staffs' families. I ignored that advice, and I met a lady who, look, the NHS does a fantastic job most of the time, but sometimes we get it wrong, and I met a lady who'd lost her mother in a really horrible death at mid-staffs. And she looked me in the eye, and she said, Jeremy, you could change this. And I decided that I wanted to make the NHS the safest, highest quality healthcare system in the world. And by the time I finished, I had my battles, but nearly 3 million more patients were using good or outstanding hospitals, including actually the hospital that used to be called Mid-Staffs, which also really raised its standards of care, which is massive credit to the staff who work there. But to answer Oliver's question, I had a very bitter battle with the junior doctors.
Sure did.
I wanted to improve standards of care at weekend because we had some data that suggested that the mortality rates were higher for people admitted at weekends. And could I have handled those things better? Well, of course you learn. And I don't think I communicated my message as well as I could have to the junior doctors. They were very active on Facebook. I wasn't very active on social media. So what do I take away from that? I think as a politician, you can never spend too much time communicating with the public. And I think as a Prime Minister, you have to be very open to doing interviews. That's part of the reason I'm doing interviews like this. I think you have to make yourself accessible, but also on social media, also, you know, continuously, not just on occasions like elections. And that's really the lesson I've learned.
Sorry to interrupt for one second, but it did take 6 years to try and do those deals at the NHS. You're trying to set a deadline of 6 weeks to sort out Brexit.
Yes, but it's not like we're starting from a standing start. You know, we've been debating these issues, thinking about these issues, really for the last 3 years. So we have made a lot of progress, and I think the elements of the deal that need to be changed in order to get it through Parliament and in order to get us out of the EU are relatively small, important, but small, which is why I think it can be done.
Interesting, you were talking about some of what you managed to achieve. I mean, you were criticised for being a micromanager, creating a climate of fear, incessant pressure to reach targets impossible to hit because of the financial squeeze. How much does that criticism hurt?
Look, you don't go into public life if you're not expecting criticism. And I think the real thing that would have hurt is 5 years on from being Health Secretary, if people weren't able to look at things in the NHS and point to things that got better. And in every single disease category, whether it's cancer, strokes, heart attacks, outcomes got better in my time as Health Secretary. But the area they didn't, which is I think what you're mentioning, was the waiting times, both for elective care, people needing new hips and knees and that kind of thing, and also for A&E. And why was that? Because we had this pressure of an ageing population. And that was why, towards the end of my time, I negotiated the biggest ever funding increase for the NHS. And what that's going to allow us to do is to train many, many more doctors and nurses, because in the end, the way that we will reduce those waiting times is to increase the capacity of the system. And you know, they were
so long to start to look for more cash.
Well, I actually managed to get quite a lot of extra cash during my time as Health Secretary. I got an extra...
During that time, patients waiting for surgery or other elective treatments rose from 2.5 million to 4 million.
Yes, but, you know, after I've been Health Secretary for a couple of years, I managed to negotiate an extra £8 billion for the NHS. But this is the figure that perhaps really illustrates the challenge facing the NHS. Over the last 5 years, there are 100,000 more staff in the NHS, and there are also 100,000 more vacancies. So we have been recruiting more people, but we need even more because of the pressures of an ageing population. And that's why I think probably the single decision that I'm most proud of as Health Secretary was one that I took in 2016 with the support of Theresa May, which is one of the biggest ever increases in the number of doctors and nurses we train. Increasing the number of doctors we train by a quarter, the number of nurses we train by a quarter. Now, it takes 3 years to train a nurse, 7 years to train a doctor, so you won't see those differences for a few years. But when we do, I think that's going to make a massive difference.
Yeah, social care was part of your brief as well. Didn't do very well there, did you?
It was part of my brief formally for my last 6 months in the job. And this, I think, should be our second big social mission. I talked about abolishing illiteracy. I was very close to my grandmother. She died a few months before her 101st birthday. And I will never forget watching those last few months of her life when she slowly lost one faculty after another. And I think we are a country where we want every single older person to be treated with dignity and respect. And at the moment in our social care system, if we're honest, that doesn't always happen. So I want us to be a...
Could you not have done that when you ran the...
Well, what I did was I negotiated a 10-year plan for the NHS. And I always said the next thing I wanted to do was to negotiate a 10-year plan for the social care system and actually bring those two systems together. But then I moved to being Foreign Secretary. So this is what I'd like to do in number 10.
What about the dignity and respect for the women of Northern Ireland who can't have an abortion, even if they have been raped or have been a victim of incest?
Well, I authorised as Health Secretary for those women to get those abortions paid for and delivered by the NHS in England, because those issues are devolved to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. They're not decided in Westminster. And I think we need to find a way around those issues. So that's what I did as Health
But when
Secretary.
Stella Creasy wanted to change the rules so that women in Northern Ireland could have abortions at home, so they wouldn't have to get on an aeroplane and have an abortion in an area that they didn't know, surrounded by people that they didn't know, you voted against that.
Because we have a constitutional settlement that says that those very difficult issues should be decided in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, in Wales, in England. And I think that this would be the wrong moment to unpick that constitutional settlement. But what I don't want to do...
It's a personal view, isn't it? It's not a constitution.
No. It's not about that at all. I wanted to find a solution. And so I said, yes, the NHS in England will pay so that those women can get those abortions.
But you would like women in England to not be able to have abortions at 12 weeks, wouldn't you?
Well, how I voted is a matter of public record, but I've made it clear that as Prime Minister, I won't change the law. There's no prospect of Parliament changing its view on that. And so that's not going to change.
Why do you hold that view?
Well, why do any of us hold views on these very difficult issues? It's
do you think
instinctive.
you're a feminist?
Yes, I do, very much so, but it's instinctive.
Is that contradictory?
Look, I believe passionately in equality, and I believe passionately in women's rights, and we all wrestle with how to interpret our views on these things. But, you know, I've said that with respect to abortion, the law's not going to change while I'm Prime Minister, because it is in this country, and I think rightly, it has always been a free vote issue for Parliament.
We're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It
Went very quickly, didn't it?
It did.
We should say that although he didn't agree to debate you directly on Sky News, the offer is still open to Boris Johnson to come in and answer our audience's questions. I promise to be good. Stay with us for full analysis from our political editor, Beth Rigby. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and for watching as the battle for number 10 is hosted here at Sky News with the Foreign Secretary, potentially the next Prime Minister. We'll know by the end of July. Jeremy Hunt, thank you.
Thank you, Kay.